Our scripture reading this morning comes from the Gospel of Mark in the 4th chapter, verses 35 to 41. On that day when evening had come, Jesus said to them, "Let us go across to the other side." And leaving the crowd behind, they took him with them in the boat, just as he was. Other boats were with him. A great gale arose, and the waves beat into the boat so that the boat was already being swamped. But he was in the stern, asleep on the cushion. And they woke him up and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" He woke up and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Peace, be still." Then the wind ceased, and there was a dead calm. He said to them, "Why are you afraid? Have you still no faith?" And they were filled with great awe and said to one another, "Who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him?" All right, friends, here we are. Got some more art for you. This week, our art that we are worshiping alongside is The Great Wave of Kanagawa by Katsushika Hakusai, who was a Japanese artist from the Edo period. Edo was what we call Tokyo now. And he created this print as part of a larger work, 36 Views of Mount Fuji, which is one of his most famous pieces of art. And so I just want to start. We're going to start being just our amateur art critics. And let's talk about, what do you see? Tilsa's like, "I'm not going to say anything." No snowmen this week. Boats? You see boats? What's that? The mountain. Do you see Mount Fuji there? It's in the background, in the middle. What else? The waves. Yeah, there's big waves, Juanita. That's right. What's that? Frothing. The frothing. What do you think about the frothing of the waves? How does that look to you? It's like claws, right? It's like it's grabbing. Like this water is not just rising up, it is coming out and grabbing, right? This is why I chose this particular depiction of water today, because when we are in the midst of a storm and the waters are rising, it just sounds like this gentle thing. Like the river is getting higher, like we see on the Connecticut River. No, the waters are rising and they are coming out to grab us. That's how it feels like when we're in this kind of a storm, and the waters actually feel like they're coming and attacking us, I think, right? You know, so when Hakusai did these works, he was very focused in and obsessed really with Mount Fuji. And it is said that he was really on this quest for immortality, that he felt his artwork would transcend the divine if only he could live long enough. And he said that at the age of 110, every dot and every stroke will be as though alive. So here is this kind of a live picture of a storm-tossed sea. And let me ask you, do you think that the people in the boat, fishermen or whoever they are, those very flimsy kind of boats, those are not ocean liners, those are not military ships, do you think they're going to make it? He's like, hopefully? Faith is convinced that those boats are made for that kind of stuff. Sure, that's great, but I don't think I'd want to be in one. Growing up near the ocean, as I did, on the shore of Connecticut, you learn pretty early the ways and whims of water. The ocean is a fun place when you're a kid, a place to swim and ride the waves and explore strange sea life. But you also learn just how dangerous it can be. The overpowering swells during a storm, or the riptide that sweeps the unsuspecting out to sea that you don't even know is there until someone feels it. And so wise parents caution their children to have a healthy respect of water. In the Bible, water is actually the first thing, right? It's the first thing in creation, but it's described as wild, this untamed and churning part of creation. And since then, in literature, water is often associated then with chaos, that primordial chaos, as in the beginning of Genesis. Lord Byron wrote this: "Roll on, thou deep and dark blue ocean, roll. 10,000 fleets sweep over thee in vain. Man makes the earth with ruin. His control stops with the shore." Or Joseph Conrad: "The sea, this truth must be confessed, has no generosity. No display of many qualities, courage, hardihood, endurance, faithfulness, has ever been known to touch its irresponsible consciousness of power." Water. Overwhelming, chaotic, powerful. But it's also generative, isn't it? Water is the source of life. Almost 3/4 of the Earth's surface is covered in water. Our bodies are about 70% water. Our brains themselves are about 85% water. Think about the next time you think about how many cups of water you're supposed to drink in a day. We know that water aids digestion and keeps our energy up. And for the disciples, the water was the source of their living, the place whose gifts offered up for their well-being of their families and in their livelihoods. The disciples know this. They know water's power. It's the greatest power in their lives. It can help them when it generously gives up its store, or it can take their lives away with its recklessness in the flash of an unexpected storm. So the disciples were very aware of the danger and power and generativity of water. But it was that storm that happened one day at the end of a long day when they were headed out in search of some peace and quiet after being with the crowds. At the beginning of their 3-hour tour, the water is willing to take them where they want to go, when all of a sudden a storm kicks up and the disciples kick into high gear, don't they? I imagine them like the Coast Guard friends I have who talked about the most perilous situations they found themselves in. And even while confessing certainly a bit of fear, they would ultimately say that it was their training that kicked in. All hands on deck and not a one who doesn't know their job and what has to get done to survive, right? These professionals of the sea. So the way this water story in this crisis unfolds in the Gospel of Mark for me is intriguing. Because these disciples, these skilled boatsmen and fishermen, are battening down the hatches when they realize someone's missing. All the hands are not on deck pitching in, are they? Because Jesus is asleep in the bottom of the boat, snoring away. Many interpret their snarky remarks to Jesus as fear, but I think they're just whining. In the Gospel of Mark, the disciples do a lot of whining. And in this story, they complain that Jesus doesn't even care that the ship is sinking and is fine with letting them do all the work, sleeping in the hull, rather than help them go and batten down the hatches. They say, "Teacher, don't you care that we're sinking here, that we're about to die?" Just think about it. If you were in that boat with Jesus, what were the choice words that you would have for him snoring away at the bottom of the boat, right? I hear snark, not fear, in that comment as they try to get Jesus to pitch in and start bailing. And so you'll note, though, that the fear doesn't actually come until later. Because listen, these professional seamen, they aren't afraid of the water. They've already made peace with what it can do. They're afraid of the one who yields a power even stronger than the greatest power in their lives. What are they supposed to make of that exactly? What are we supposed to make of that? When Jesus wakes up, he speaks to the storm, to the threatening circumstance, saying, "Peace, be still." And with that command still hanging in the air, he turns to the disciples, the ones he had just explained all those great parables to, by the way, and says, "Don't you yet have faith?" And traditionally, this has been taken as a rebuke to the disciples for their lack of faith, for an inadequate faith in him that he would and could protect them. But that doesn't seem quite true to the text, because this whole conversation is about whether or not Jesus is going to protect them, right? These are expert fishermen. So if Jesus' argument is that the disciples should have had the faith to expect that Jesus would save them from the storm, what then should they have done? What would have constituted faith in that circumstance? Not woken him up? Continued to bail themselves out all on their own? Or better yet, just put down their buckets and waited? I can tell you we've tried all those things in our own faith lives, right? So I just don't buy it with the disciples. So you look at the text closely and you will see that the disciples don't show their real fear until after Jesus calms the storm and delivers his speech. The text then says, "And the disciples were filled with a great fear and said to one another, 'Who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him?'" The winds have quieted, and the waters are still. The boat has stopped pitching. So then, disciples, what is there to be afraid of then in that moment? They weren't afraid of the storm. This story isn't about the storm. It's about Jesus. There was a bigger threat than the weather. There was an even larger concern than sinking at sea. Who then is this that even the water and sea and wind obey him? They aren't half as afraid of the storm as they are of Jesus' power to calm it. Because if Jesus can do that to the sea, then what might he have in mind to do with them? Who then is this that we're following around? Who then is this? It's an important question to ask, but be careful. Because it turns out that the question is as much about Jesus as it is about you. This isn't a story about faith being the antidote for fear. It's not a story about conquering fear, about not being afraid. It's about knowing what exactly to fear. So the story goes on in the gospel as Jesus moves from place to place in the boat, healing the people who come to him. This story goes on after this storm. We don't hear much about the conversation. All we hear is this witnessing to what Jesus goes then about to do as the disciples follow him around. And he heals Legion, and he heals Jairus' daughter and the woman with the issue of blood. And when he finally gets back to addressing the disciples again in chapter 6, do you know what he does? He sends them out, 2 by 2. And he tells them, don't take anything for the journey, no money, no coat, no food, and sends them forth into who they are being called to become, people who heal and love and restore and bring justice and hope for God's sake. The story of the storm is just the prelude for the ways God is intending to trouble the waters of our lives and change them forever. For the disciples, that was something to fear. We get it, don't we? And so, my friends, here we sit, calmly in our pews. You don't look a bit disturbed by anything that I've just said. But what about when the waters rise? How is God troubling our waters, hoping to wake us up? You see, the church isn't supposed to be a luxury liner where we are waited on and catered to, but that vessel in the middle of the storm where with both buckets and faith in hand, we're doing enough to calm the sea itself, to change the places where storms are raging in the world, where people's boats are rocking and they need us to wake up from our sleeping places and not only say, yes, yes, we do care, but take all that we have along with God's help to calm that raging sea. So let us not underestimate the presence that fills these walls and comes in with power, transforming power, redeeming power, power that seeks to undo you and make you something new and calls you to it for the sake of something incredible in the world. It's trembling somewhere deep within the bowels of this particular ship, and it is appropriately terrifying. But I close with a reminder that, like my Coast Guard friends, we are not without skills and blessings and resources and faith. We have each other, and together we can make a way for someone else through the storm, can't we? The British Navy, perhaps most navies, have a particular call communicated through the bosun's whistle. It's called, I find this fascinating, pipe the still. Where did that word come from? What did Jesus say to the water? Peace, be still. So on the Navy, they pipe the still. When danger arises and chaos ensues, the bosuns pipe the still to call all hands to attention, to order silence, and to give instructions. And I find this fascinating. That call is always followed, after an interval, by the carry on command. When the waters rise, listen for Jesus to say, peace, be still. And having piped the still, remember to listen for what comes next. Because faith always calls us forward to go out then and carry on. Amen.